Welcome back all. We hope you had a nice lunch. After 2 days of intense, engaging discussions and exchanging points of view in SANIS, I'm sure lots of new ideas are in your mind. And we hope you take away lots of new ideas and practical guidance that will be useful for you. We hope you got the information that you needed and that these sessions in the past few days were informative, and as well as that you had enjoyed the various topics covered during the GANIS as well as the SANIS. We, over the past few days, discussed several characteristics of the latest development of our global plans, the Global Air Navigation Plan and the Global Aviation Safety Plan, as well as from developments to implementation, the tools and support to meet these goals of the global plans. We have discussed in the SANIS several safety key topics, including the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, the role of regional safety oversight organizations, in particular the new concept of Global Aviation Safety Oversight Systems, and debated some of the top 3 of the emerging issues, which include risks posed by transport of lithium batteries by air, the positive impact of airports on health, and threats to cybersecurity. We looked at safety management using a holistic approach, airport performance with the air navigation system, and how to increase civil military cooperation. We also discussed the PBN, performance-based navigation, the implementation challenges, as well as some successes. We also, onwards we went with performance-based aerodrome operating minima and aeronautical information management. We had numerous interesting topics this week, so many, and several sessions ran in parallel. So this afternoon, as part of the wrap-up, we will provide you an overview of the symposium and its key outcomes during this afternoon session. Because we have streams running in parallel, you probably were not able to divide yourself into different pieces and to follow it. Therefore, we now have this wrap-up session in which we will capture some of the main points from each of the streams. To moderate your final session, I would like now to invite Steve Krimmer, our Director at Navigation Bureau. Please, warm welcome.
Thanks, Erwin. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be back with you and to be ready finally on Friday afternoon after a cold and snowy week to summarize the activities in the Safety and Air Navigation Implementation Symposium. We've had streams running in parallel, which means that none of you has had an opportunity to see or hear all of the material that's been presented. And so in this wrap-up session, we've asked some leaders to come and provide us with their readouts on the various streams, and then we'll have a little bit of interactive question and answer on some of the things that they may have seen. A lot of work in the last 2.5 days discussing implementation activities associated with all of the change in aviation, driven by growth, driven by changes in mandates, and by new technologies that are challenging the way we do business, so that we need to have new processes. For this panel, I'm joined by Mr. David Gamper. He's the Director of Safety, Technical, and Legal Affairs for ACI at the far end. Steve Bradford, Chief Scientist from the Federal Aviation Administration. Ben Alcott, the Head of International Directorate for the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Sven, the Regional Officer for Air Navigation Services and ATM at ICAO in the Europe and North Atlantic region in Paris. Michael Standar, the Chief Strategy and External Affairs Director for SESAR Joint Undertaking out of Brussels. Chris Hope, he's the Manager of the Flight Operations Branch of the Flight Standards Service AFS 410 out of the FAA and that's Advanced Tech Flight Standards and Procedures. And then finally, Professor Evelyne Leeuw, who's the director of the Center for Health Equity Training, Research and Evaluation. It's a great acronym, CHETRE. Part of the UNSW Australia Research Center for Primary Healthcare and Equity A Unit of Population Health. She's going to talk about healthy airports. It's interesting. And then Dave Edwards, he's with the ICAO-IMO and U.S. Coast Guard, doing work on behalf of both IMO and ICAO on cost-based SARSAT, but paid for by the U.S. Coast Guard. Okay, got it right there, Dave? Okay. So the first question I'd like to pose is going to start at the far end with David Gamper, who's going to talk a little bit about safety and the Global Aviation Safety Plan. Dave, we're working heavily with states and industry to revise the GASP and its goals and targets in a way to best meets the needs of all stakeholders. Based on what you've seen this week, are we going in the right direction?
Yes, I believe we are, Stephen. I think the work that's ongoing at the moment to produce a new version of the plan is proceeding in the right direction. We've kind of validated that, I think. Obviously, the goal is 0 accidents, but we don't actually think that's totally attainable. We will just be working to improve what we already do and do well, do it even better with better safety management and all those tools that we're developing, for example, in the field of runway safety.
All right. So as we go through and have our dialogue on safety and all of the other topics, Dave, you'll have a chance to come back and intervene as people talk. So I want to make sure that we get a chance to work through the various reviews, and then we'll come back and have the dialogue. So next up, Steve Bradford. In the modernization of the air navigation system stream, the goal of the modernization is to gather feedback as we move forward for next year's 13th Air Navigation Conference. Do you think the feedback we've collected from this session is going to be useful for that?
Yeah, I really do. I think, first of all, we understand that we still need to transform the air navigation system. That we're on the course to meet the concepts that we laid out 15, 20 years ago in the GAP mock, that we need to do this to meet societal expectations for both efficiency, safety, availability of air transportation. What I think is a big difference this time was that we saw a lot of conversation about new emerging technologies that are available to aviation, and probably an emphasis on the need for a more pro-innovation regulatory certification framework. We also saw that the transformation is still not a revolution, it's an evolution. But because of these new emerging technologies, in that evolution, there'll be nations who can leapfrog using the new technologies to get where we want to go along the way. And finally, that the Global Air Navigation Plan is still the key to ensuring the interoperability and harmonization of the global air navigation system. Over and over again, the presenters said, we need a GAMP. The GAMP is good. And that the GAMP will actually provide an opportunity, open the door to innovation.
All right, thanks, Steve. Next up, Ben, do you believe the Global Aviation System Safety Oversight System can have an impact to help do this as we move into these areas where we have new opportunities for developing capabilities? Will it have an impact on states to fulfill their aviation safety oversight responsibilities when Steve brings a modern piece of tech into their outfit?
I certainly think it's part of the picture, Steve. It won't do it on its own. I think it's a new piece of thinking that will help us deliver some of this technology and change into our system. But I think there's a few other things that we'll need to do as well. There's a theme that I picked up that I think has gone through both GANIS and SANIS about political will and political engagement. And I think we'll need to keep working at engaging with political leaders to make sure we do get that political will. that we'll need to invest in regulation as a fundamental part of supporting that growth if we're going to deliver the socio-economic benefits of aviation to more people. I think within that, I suppose I'd say something about regulatory innovation, which is where I think GASOS fits in. As well as the industry innovating and bringing new technology and growth, I think as regulators we've also got to look at more innovative ways of how we deliver oversight in a way that is more cost effective, that delivers a safer environment whilst not holding that technology back. And that's where I sort of put GASOS at the moment, but it might not be the only thing we need to do. We'll need to keep thinking about that as the technology arrives. And I think in the safety management space, there's certainly room for ICAO to develop more of a framework about integrating management of risk, and looking for further opportunities as well as GASOS to promote safety management implementation and performance management. And I think looking at some of the competencies we need in the aviation community to do that will be really important.
Thanks, Ben. Sven, you've been in the civil military stream. We've been having a lot of dialogue about new tech, new ways of regulating. How can we make sure that the military cooperation implementation can be enhanced, and how do you think ICAO can help support that in the context of what we've heard?
Let me start with the takeaway message from the whole stream. Civil-military cooperation is not a mission impossible if you have a clear political will to engage in technical and operational discussions. Trust, coordination, collaboration, communication, we call them the 3 Cs, and the mutual respect and understanding of all user requirements are key essential components. And especially in civil-military cooperation, implementation that we have seen must be scalable and based on the operational context. In this presentations we have seen one size really does not fit all. We have to work with all the stakeholders, we have to engage them in proper training at all levels. Our role, ICAO, I mean, we have a number of assembly resolutions in place on coordination and cooperation of military air traffic. We have institutional and regulatory framework in place in the provisions. We have documents, we have guidance material at the global with the Circular 330, but as well as in the numbers of the regional level with specific documents and operational bulletins. But we are also finalizing guidance, new guidance with ICAO Doc 10088, the Civil Military Cooperation Manual, which will be, of course, great material and hope to be out early next year. And I think we also don't have to underestimate the role that ICAO can play in implementation support as a specialized UN agency. We can engage in the global and regional workshops and with specific task forces, as we have done in the European region, with all aviation stakeholders to address the specific aspects of civ-mil cooperation, raising the understanding, sharing best practices, publishing guidance, and in some instances also implementing concrete measures to enhance the safety of flight operations for all civil and military operations, as we have seen in the Baltic Sea. The example from the civ-mil streams have shown us a number of examples of civ-mil cooperation, starting from basic safety-related coordination and of information at national level, but up to the advanced cooperation with shared ATS systems, shared and co-located functions, joint procurement of systems, improved airspace utilization, and the use of airspace management tools. Even the full integration of civil and military staff into one ACC for joint air traffic service provision for all airspace users was presented. Implementing existing best practices and guidance on civ-mil cooperation will tremendously impact safety, capacity, and efficiency of both civil and military aviation. And advanced cooperation, the radar data sharing, the training, common licenses, common procurement, is possible and beneficial. However, it requires the highest level of trust and understanding from all existing, and we also learn from all future new stakeholders that use the same airspace.
Thank you, Sven. That's a solid rundown. Michael, For concept to operation, what are the main challenges for implementation of the new concepts? What were the lessons that have been learned from pioneering implementation?
If I may, thank you, Steve. It's a good question. I think one of the main things that we saw from the stream is that you need to collaborate. You need to collaborate very early in the process. You need to pioneer, and it doesn't have to be pioneering everywhere. The ones that starts, they will get into. It's not very selected few. Small steps was another thing that came through. Don't wait for the final one to be in place. Just start with small steps. Make sure that everyone's behind, but focus on implementation. When you do these steps, the focus there is important because it comes down into the concrete things where you want to implement things, and then it gets a little bit easier for others to pick up on it later on. The one size does not fit all was very clear. The involvement of all the stakeholders, including the regulators, very early in the process to understand what this really means and to embrace all the difficult questions very early. The sooner you embrace them, the sooner you answer them, the better you'll get. Trust, but I guess the trust issue comes very much along the lines of if you bring people in early, you start to understand what everyone can do. Not everyone has to do everything everywhere. You can trust others to do it for you, and that trust element, I think, brings us down into us as human beings, that we need to start getting to that point where we can dissolve that element of distrust that I think we see in a number of places. The CONOPS was discussed, and I think the CONOPS is really a discussion of making sure that everyone understands the operational problem or the things that we're there to solve, and I think it's very much about getting people on the same page. Do we talk the same language when we talk about the operational issue? Again, it comes back to spend a little bit more time of understanding that operational problem before you move on. Safety cases, we heard from the stream that safety cases need to start early in the R&D process. It is definitely a must. It is achievable across ANSPs in many places, across stakeholder groups. So I think we saw evidence to that effect, that we don't have to keep that in our own little box so we can move on. Project management, of course, successful implementation starts with a plan, but nevertheless make sure that that plan is focused on implementation, nothing else. The change management thing was up there. I think change management brings us back into human behavior and human performance. We need to start thinking of that. It is not just a buzzword. Let's make it concrete and take it away forward. The regulatory approach, as I mentioned before, I think we need to start thinking of regulators working more closely together. We saw some good examples of where this is happening, and I don't think there's a necessity to be afraid of working together here. You can still keep your impartial role as the regulator of the system. So all in all, training came up there, but I think it's also the factor of getting trust into the system.
Thanks, Michael. So, Chris Hope, you've been involved in the actual procedures. We get past the concept to the real world. So in PBN, we deal with a lot of really precise technology and procedures, definitions. How do you see the performance-based aerodrome operating minima changing the way we operate in the future, and how we need to engage to make that happen? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I think one of the first things that kind of came to mind following the stream this morning, as we had a lot of discussions and good discussions about it, was the concept of aircraft-centric operations, and PBAOM in itself is kind of a new name, but the concept itself is really not that new. The idea of having capabilities that are in the airplane and mitigating some of those capabilities, from ground infrastructure by using these advanced avionics is actually something that's been going on for quite some time. The first autolands that have been going on for 30, 40 years is kind of an example of that. We've renamed this PBAOM, and we've just kind of trying to take it that next step, that next evolution a little bit further, and trying to engage it even on more basic levels as well. The idea now of with the capabilities of satellite-based approaches you no longer need these ground infrastructure requirements to have an instrument approach somewhere. So you're able to take a piece of concrete or asphalt somewhere, with basic runway markings and devise and build an instrument approach to that, which not only does that increase efficiency, capacity, but it's a safer way to operate as well. And then you take that to the extreme where you've got some of these advanced technologies like enhanced flight vision systems, which now you can have a Category 1 runway, again, minimal infrastructure, but you could get all the way down to Category 3 visibilities. So that's really exciting. I think it's really neat. Where we would like to see this going, and this is something coming from, certainly the operator side, and it's going to sound kind of strange, but, what we would like to see eventually is the idea where the operator has an airplane. He has capabilities. He knows what it can do. He's trained to a certain level. He goes to the aerodrome. He looks what's available on the aerodrome, and then he says that my minima are going to be this. And so in order to get there, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of, I think, socializing this concept and being able to kind of talk to the other domains and hear their concerns and what some kind of issues that they may have with this kind of idea. With that regard, we would like to continue this discussion. We think it would be a great idea perhaps for a day-long symposium especially to reach out to people outside of the flight ops world and discuss these ideas and how we think that they can move forward.
Now I'm excited. Actually, it's really hard sometimes to get people to go, wow, with PBN, but the idea that I could take my airplane and set the minima, that's cool. So I think that's going to be something we'll all be able to work on. Well, we get to the airport, and then we're gonna talk about how Professor, you brought the idea that the airport could actually contribute to our health. So tell us a little bit about that stream and what the idea is that you've heard this week.
Well, first let me thank ICAO and the friends that I've made here for inviting me to enable me to brainwash you a little bit. Because I found that I thought our ideas of healthy airports would resonate here, but a lot of people actually think that airports are bad by definition. They make noise and they're not good. Security is an issue, infectious disease, and we've been involved in looking at those negative health impacts. And at one point we thought, but all of that negativity could be offset by positivity. Airports employ people. Employment is good for health. You need to get to airports. Mobility is good for health. There's a catering industry associated with airports. Well, good food is good for your health. So we started to frame this idea of healthy airports, and it's fantastic that we've now had an opportunity to talk to a lot of different stakeholders from the industry. And I should say that this also happens in the context of CAPSCA, and don't know whether everybody is aware of what that acronym means. I don't know it by heart yet, but that's the collaborative arrangement for the prevention and management of public health events in civil aviation. And it's already a group of highly engaged stakeholders looking at health and disease and control and management of that disease in the aviation space. And in our discussion, what we found that CAPSCA would really be interested in moving beyond looking at disease, looking at health and the impacts of airports on health through all of those different parameters, and not just for passengers, not just for people who work at airports, but also the communities who live around those airports. One of the bits of research that we've been doing has shown that if you engage communities in airport planning and development, those communities generally are in support of airports. They don't whinge about noise profiles, which is an important insight, I think. So we have a bit of a recommendation, which is to engage all stakeholders, industry, governments, but also communities, in exploring the opportunities that healthy airports would bring to CAPSCA, to ICAO, but also to all the other stakeholders in the game, and take us forward in promoting health and human development.
Okay, so I really like that. That's exciting because it actually puts some meaning behind a lot of the work that we've traditionally called environmental protection, but it shows the benefit from the perspective of the aviation stakeholder to make that engagement, because it improves the business model in the long run. A lot like what we're having to do with carbon reduction and other things. So Dave, we have to be a little more serious in this last topic. So the global aviation distress and safety system has some challenges for moving forward with the implementation. With the adoption of aircraft tracking standards by ICAO, autonomous distress tracking and timely retrieval of flight recorder data provisions coming forward, ICAO has taken steps towards the implementation of the GADS concept of operations. What implementation challenges ahead of these applicability dates are envisioned? What can we do about it?
Thank you, Mr. Creamer, and also thank you for putting me next to health. I represent search and rescue. That is saving lives, so it's a very good and next position to be. So you're right, there are major challenges. But after what I have seen here in this whole SANIS program, I have further strengthened my confidence those challenges will be overcome. I never had a doubt that we would overcome them and meet the deadlines. There was never a discussion about missing deadlines. We are quite confident based on the strands that were discussed here and the sidebar discussions. Something as critical as swim is very, very important. We learned a lot about swim here, and it will play a major role for the GADS concepts that are being implemented. Now, there are challenges, such as the information flow. That is very, very critical. Not only the format and the content of the information, but where does that information go? We need to make sure that the air traffic service units can exchange this information amongst themselves, that the operators can share that information, that the rescue coordination centers get pulled in. All these require proper updating, maintenance of databases. We need to automate this flow of information, but it also means we need to automate where it goes to. And those are three critical receivers of information: the ATSUs, the operators, and the rescue coordination centers. On top of that is what type of information are we sending, or where are we going to have a repository? The whole thing is being aided by the vision for the swim system that you have down the road. And we are confident with that we can make great progress. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Sven or Mike, I'm going to ask you to pick up the other mic so that we've got mics on both ends, because now we've had a little bit of intro into each of the swim or each of the streams. I'm interested if any of you has any comments that already are on your mind that you want to raise based upon the interaction of the interventions you've made so far. David?
So, Steve, yes, in answer to that, I was answering your question originally about the global safety plan. I talked about runway safety, but I didn't talk about the other two substreams. And for runway safety, by the way, we have now the Runway Safety Action Plan. Was well discussed and is I think, broadly accepted as a good basis for going forwards, with its emphasis on collaboration and on local runway safety teams. So the other two substreams I'd just like to mention, ground handling, of course, a very important one, and notoriously difficult there to deal with safety, because we have a situation where the environment is staff turnover is high. There's downward pressure on costs all the time. There's a lot of handling companies involved at a typical airport, and a lot of training problems, I think, because of the turnover. So ICAO is producing a manual on ground handling, and the work is going very well. It's nearly complete. That, I think, will lead to some very good guidance material being available for states and airports, and of course all the other stakeholders too. We see that as being very useful, and maybe a step further would be some SARPs in due course. Also on airport certification, that was the third substream. It's a very interesting one. It's been a requirement since 2001. It is implemented only to a certain degree, let's say. Some states are still wrestling with the problem of certifying airports, and some airports are perhaps having difficulty with producing the information that the state needs to certify them. So we've got some proposals to improve that position, noting that it has great benefits, in fact, and safety compliance can be increased by certification. We know that because the process leads to clarifying exactly what the issues are that are stopping certification and resolving them. And that in the process then, with a certificate, the airport can benefit. It has not only more confidence, but also possibility of reduced liability issues and maybe reduced insurance premiums. We actually heard that from an insurance company during the session. So all in all, I think we're making progress in the airport stream.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And Michael?
Oh, do I go ahead? Okay. I got a bit confused here. Who was had the mic? So I have the mic. Thank you. Now, there's one reflection I think we took away from the pioneering, the implementations, is that you start seeing that these are, life is not as simple as now is implementation or development, then is implementation. We see implementations getting out of these stovepipes of different things, and you start seeing that they connect with other modules that we see in our ASBUs. And that's the important thing about the implementations, that maybe this is the first instance where you can group them together because they start making good benefits to the system when you put them together. PBN, I think, was a very good example of that. We talked about how this can be moved forward, what are the current problems, but when you start connecting that with better timed arrival management, suddenly you get into a situation where the airborne and the ground gets closer together and you get a better system as such. So I think not getting stovepiped into different areas when we implement, start looking a little bit broader, and that was one of the key points I could see.
Okay, thanks. Ben?
I'd quite like to pick up on that point, actually. I think what we're really saying there and some of the other comments from earlier is about management of change. And I think as regulators, we're going to have to think much more about how we manage change in the future, and seeing that as part of our role. The pace of technological change is only going to increase. So the more we're going to need to think about how as regulators we manage that change, how we think about the interfaces and the risk interfaces that we'll see between the new technology and old technology in particular, and how we think more about integrated risk management. I think this is where SMS should come into its own, really. It should give us the framework we need to allow some of these things to happen in a really safe way, which means we're going to have to think about how we implement SSP in a risk-based way, to make sure that we're allowing SMS to do its job properly.
Okay, and for the whole panel, I'll ask you to think about this. I'll come to you in a minute. So we've really started to talk about the impact of safety methodology on new development, new concepts, expansions of capacity, etc. The GAMP and the ASBUs have a certain construct. The safety plan has a different construct, but I think we're starting to see that the ties need to be tightened. And so if you have any reflections that have come out of this week, I'd be interested to hear that. Steve, you were about to riff on what Ben said, I think, and so I'm going to come back over to you.
So actually, I'll rip on a little bit of what you said. You turn it off here?
It's good.
Okay. So what you said, and then I'll get back to, in preparing for the previous version of the GAMP, we actually went and looked and said, there are clearly a lot of the ASBU and the modules and the elements are there to support safety and improving safety. I think the one big change that you'll see in the new GAMP is where we really do call it the basic building blocks, which in almost every case are about increasing the safety of flight. So it includes the RNAV, it includes the share of information. I think the other big thing we've had this week is that internet is here to stay and it's invading everything. So, and it has to be global. The GADS, the tracking says I need to have a global system and to be able to share. The concept element group talked about sharing information across FERS, which actually means across regions, so you can do better planning. So, and that came out in our sessions that the emerging new technology, and lots of times, is the new communications and is the new availability of information. So I was really excited this week about all the increasing use of commercial technology to provide information for aviation. And so I think that's the other, if I didn't emphasize that enough before, I think that the GAMP and all the sessions really did talk about the increased need for sharing of information, not just with your stakeholders locally, but globally, in order to get what you need.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Evelyne, please.
I just got a tweet that actually ties all of this together in an interesting way from my friends at Médecins Sans Frontières. And they say, look, think about humanitarian aid and emergency relief. Healthy airports would be the places to deliver that more appropriately. But it's also about military-civil cooperation. It is about search and rescue. So I think there are visions that we could have, and we talked about leadership and political guts. And I think we come into our own when we fix things in this world. And I think emergency aid, disaster relief, that is when the aviation industry is already without borders, and we can help our friends at Médecins Sans Frontières.
That's a good point. Thank you. Chris? Okay.
I'll be quick. I just was going to piggyback on that concept of the disaster aid, and that was certainly came up in a presentation that we had this morning. And this idea of areas that you're going to go into that are going to be less developed, and the structures may have been damaged, may have been just completely destroyed. And then with the technologies we have now, the abilities with PBN and things like that, we're able to get aid in there quicker and easier and safer. And again, leveraging these concepts of mitigating some of these things that we normally would require on the ground with something that's in the aircraft. So I mean, yeah, it all does kind of tie together.
Dave?
Thank you. I'm more familiar with the GAMP than I am with the GASP. But what I would like to note is the overall ICAO culture for collaboration. I've seen it written down. I've heard it throughout the whole week. And also I heard it in the SMS discussions this morning. I've heard it here several times. Search and rescue is not a routine part of these meetings, but I have greatly benefited from the full collaboration and coordination, getting rid of stovepipes with the working groups that ICAO has set up to handle GAD's concept of operations as it implements those different streams of the GAD's concept. So I think just your overall culture is commendable for collaboration, and that's being heard across everybody here. And now our job is to get those other people to collaborate with us. So I compliment ICAO.
Thanks, Dave. Sven?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on this disaster relief humanitarian aid point. We had exactly that presentation in the CIVML stream, where we had hurricane response operation experienced, openly discussed with us and shared with us. Disaster relief in the main starts with the military going in there and checking what is the situation in close cooperation, coordination with the CAAs. And when they have cleared it up and in this cooperation then said, okay, now we can have UN airplanes coming in, we can have commercial air transport coming in for disaster relief, that also needs this cooperation. And sometimes the equipment is down, runways need to be repaired, we need to have security because the fences have been torn down as we had seen in the hurricanes. That needs to be picked up by the military, but that also is one of the fundamentals that we have seen in this whole collaborative environment. And to bring up this experience from our team, for us it started with understanding and respecting the different requirements. Users have different operational requirements that don't need a discussion. We just have to better understand them, share them, because sometimes they're not known. And also with the new users we are seeing that will also have requirements that will be completely different what we have seen so far. Space operations, the whole UAS RPAS threats. We have to sit together, understand those requirements, respect those requirements, and then come up with a coordination that will bring us to this collaborative approach.
Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes, maybe a little more, but when you go home, what's the first thing you think you'll process after the holidays and want to do based upon what you've heard this week? what's the first change you'll make in 2018, or what would you do even more of, or maybe less than, based on what you've heard? Michael's gutsy. He goes first.
Well, this time I know I'm on the mic. No, I think one of the key takeaways is what I said before about stovepipes. We need to start thinking a little bit broader, but also putting a little bit more emphasis on verifying technical systems, validating operational systems, validating on real operational systems with real operational people, demonstrate and try and move demonstrations one step further. I think it's something we will probably have to have a look at for the Air Navigation Conference next year. So how can we move these demonstrations one step further? Because it's a very good way to start engaging stakeholders for everyone to understand what this really means. I mean, there's some truth to the fact that see is to believe. But if we keep that in binders, in our shelves, and work in our small clubs, it's not going to go out there. And we can scream about it, but, at the end of the day, get out there and show it, demonstrate it. But we probably would like to know or like to see if there is an easier kind of framework on how you demonstrate things, where you can do better versions of standards, for example. But I think that goes back to regulators and making sure that we have them on board very early in the process so that we can apply the SMS systems in such a way that we still play it safe, but we look into more efficient systems. That's certainly what I'll take away from here, but collaboration is key here.
Thanks, Mike. Sven? Anybody else?
For me, it's share what I've seen from other regions. Sometimes we are too close, bound up in our own regions and our projects. Those different streams have really showcased lots of other activities that we have normally no access to. And I think sharing the information with the other stakeholders is, for me, the thing I will take out as the first priority of this seminar.
Thanks, Ben. Dave?
Thank you again, Ms. Creamer. First, I would be getting better prepared for Ian's face-to-face meeting on autonomous distress tracking matters for the meeting in January. But also, I've already been talking with Miguel and some others about arranging some ICAO additional representation, also swim discussions at the ICAO Joint Working Group meeting with the IMO search and rescue experts. Get our search and rescue experts better informed about what's going on here. Trying to build that cooperation, coordination, collaboration. My job is to get the search and rescue community up to speed with what you are moving forward on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
I'll go next then, Steve.
All right, Ben.
I think for me it'll be redoubling things that we are already trying to do, but I think that I've felt that this week has really, excuse me, has really helped me understand I think we're on the right path. So the whole international group at CA is about trying to raise aviation standards around the globe sustainably. And everything I've heard this week has really heartened me that we're on the right track at wanting to do that. So for me, the takeaway will be to go and keep down that path, keep developing programs that I think will help other states improve their safety performance, keep engaging in programs like GASOS here so we can keep innovating about how we deliver regulation in the future. And just keep looking for ways to support things like No Country Left Behind as a way of delivering improvement.
Thanks, Ben.
I'll let you go first. Then I'll go.
Dave.
Yeah, I think for me it'll be incremental improvements, first of all, in our present standards, which we're working on and continuing to work on. I'm sure now that those are the right things to do. In addition, innovation is this a big area we're working on in airports, and I think that there are some particularly interesting ones that we'll pursue. We've always wanted to do more about improving capacity and improving safety at the same time at smaller airports, and satellite landing systems definitely provide that opportunity. And I think we need to work with states and work with ICAO to get that to happen more rapidly, I think. Also, innovations on the airport, or safety improvements can be made, depending on whether the airport has the ability to do it, or maybe financial capacity as well. Some of them are fairly costly. Things like follow the greens, ASMIG systems, very costly, but ultimately very worthwhile, I'm sure. And also foreign object detection systems. There are numerous improvements like that. Arresting systems where necessary. All these things excite me a lot, and I think we've got to drive this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Steve?
Well, I think the thing we're going to work on is trying to leverage all those new people that were here this week. The people at the lowest altitudes and the people at the highest altitudes. We had brand new technologists coming here, and I think if we can leverage what they want to do for us at the highest altitudes, you know, a secure, cyber secure, global network system with information sharing, I think not only does that then roll down and rise up into our traditional airspace, but I really think it's a leapfrog. It's one of those leapfrogging technologies that will help lots of parts of the world. So I think we'll really double our efforts in engaging with these people, with these new technologies and their ideas, and try to see if we can't build something that'll then revolutionize the middle legacy ground.
Okay.
Yes,
Evelyne?
that leaves me, and unfortunately, I have to be monomaniacal. I really felt supported with some enthusiasm here for our healthy airports stuff. So I'll continue to develop that, and continue to work with new friends that I've made here. So.
Okay. Well, in that regard, then, even though you've been in the aviation business a long time, we're going to consider you're part of the new entrants, because you're helping to change the paradigm of the way we think about what the issues are we've traditionally approached. And having those new ways of approaching things is actually very refreshing for us as a group, I think. So I'm going to turn now and just close, because I think it's time for that. We've run just about out of time. First thing I'd like to do is ask for a round of applause for the panelists. I think they did a great job of summarizing. And for all of you who are still here, and I have to tell you, it's remarkable on Friday at 2:45 that you are still here, this many people. And I think that is a testament to the quality of what you brought. We've seen so many good presentations, discussions on new concepts, and now the implementation of those concepts. To meet the expectations of the traveling public for a safe and efficient aviation system, and to also meet the needs of people on the ground with new aviation systems in a way that in this hall maybe we had never ever considered before. We saw some great examples of implementation support, best practices for safety, capacity, and efficiency, and I'm most pleased to hear and see the collaborative spirit that has been demonstrated across the board. The states and the industry working together to further enhance aviation safety and air navigation is the only way that we will succeed. States can't do it by themselves, and the industry certainly needs support from the regulatory and air navigation service community, from nations who set policy about how their natural resources, including their airspace, are utilized. But there's a lot of work to do to make this go. And we had a conversation last night as we hot washed a little bit and recognized that maybe the approach that we've taken as we assembled this symposium, we might have done differently with the insights we've gained this week. We tended to approach this symposium with some of the same subject matter stovepipes that we are used to. And what we heard from many of you was more integration might be necessary in the way these things are approached. But that integration at the beginning brings complexity that makes it really hard for people to touch and grasp. And we're going to have to find the way to bring that back to a more simple message that all of us can relate to people away from aviation who have the resources to allow us to get this work done. And that's something that I think we're going to be thinking about really seriously at ICAO throughout the organization, and with the leadership that we have in the Council and the Air Navigation Commission. The symposium highlighted that every element of effective implementation is predicated upon the establishment of comprehensive regional collaboration mechanisms and the ICAO regional supporting mechanisms that facilitate interregional alignment, harmonization, sharing of best practices, and of the lessons learned. It doesn't happen in Montreal. It happens in the field. And our regional offices are really energized by the idea that they can engage in this process with you. This will be achieved with ICAO playing a key role in assisting the states to create national plans that aren't just aviation or transport plans, but overall national plans that integrate aviation into their priorities for implementation. We're working with our standards roundtable and now with new agreements with the technical standards making bodies to assist some of our regional industry partners in bringing essentially camera-ready material to ICAO so that we can increase the rate of deployment of the necessary standards here that will support your implementations. And again, working it in a way that simplifies for the states and for the industry so that you understand what's coming and it's forecastable. We want to do that with packages that are tailored for the specific needs of the states. We don't need states to implement airspace change or infrastructure that's not necessary for their market or for their operations. So the basic building blocks, as Steve said, are a key element of that. And the way we approach that deployment with our safety systems is something that ICAO is going to be seriously evaluating over the next couple of years. And at the Air Navigation Conference in October, the states will be deliberating and thinking about the way they relate to the ICAO requirements and to one another, because ultimately international safety regulation is an exercise in trust amongst the 192 member states, and they'll have to have confidence that the states are doing this in a way that meets their requirements for each other. I'd like to close with thanks for many of the people who were involved today, or actually over the last several months, in making this symposium possible, but frankly, I'd keep you here until 4. Our key manager for the Global Air Navigation Industry Symposium was Salo da Silva. He was supported by Thomas Breitbart, and they had support from Adriana Bonilla, who actually is the interface to our conference services folks for my bureau, and of course they had support from all of the folks at conference services, and we stressed them this week with 4 streams of activity across 5 days, and I think they did a phenomenal job. We had folks who did the IT for us and kept all of our slides up and running. Olga de Frutas is one of the key authors on our Global Air Navigation Plan and worked with a lot of folks on the preparation of their material to make it flow here. We had we had a booth outside. Gilbert ran our GIS booth, and it showed over 800 people. Some of our tools over the course of the week. He's going to need a break. Neil Highland worked on an MOU that we signed this week with WIMAX Forum to begin the prototyping of our cybersecurity capabilities and developing an authentication and trust capability that we hope will evolve into a product or an offering that the states can use to work with their industry. And that was progressed here this week. Yuri Fatah worked on innovation with the innovation group and the new entrants. Alessandro Capretti and Von Miola, Lofter, and Mia worked on the CNS future for the GAMP on the standards roundtable. And we had several other folks involved. I'm running out of time to say all of the names. And then we had the safety side. And on the safety side, Erwin Lasoy was our lead for the development of the program. Raza, you helped him with all the synchronization. Miguel Marin was the chief. We had Elizabeth Ganin on safety management, along with Marty, Mikkel, Ansa, Haba, Michael, Tatiana, Brian, Adolfo, and Ian. The entire Air Navigation Bureau was engaged in this, and along with our partners in the Support Bureau, they thank you for making it worthwhile with your engagement. Over 200 speakers and panelists over 5 days. And many of you are in the audience now. Many of you came to hear them for the first time, and maybe the next time around you'll be the panelists or speakers. We certainly hope so. This gives us so much content to take forward for the Commission and the Council to evaluate and move into the work program in the Air Navigation Conference in the next assembly, and we are thankful for all of that input because it puts ICAO in a really good place to serve you. So thank you all very much for your attendance. We wish you a very pleasant trip home, hopefully, and a fantastic holiday season, and 2018 is going to rock because of your contributions here. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks very much, y'all.